About being a Sky News journalist.
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is why it hasn't been stopped.
I'm Yalda Hakim, live in Jerusalem tonight on The Wrap. Has the Iran war ended the special relationship? President Trump unleashes a stinging personal attack on the Prime Minister, accusing him of being uncooperative over the conflict.
So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
The president's rebuke came despite RAF jets shooting down Iranian drones over Jordan and a UK decision to deploy a warship to Cyprus. And while the politicians argue, US and Israeli strikes on Iran continue for a fourth day. America says it has now hit more than 1,700 targets. Tehran continues to retaliate, attacking American allies and US bases in the Gulf, as well as targets in Israel. The continuing war rattles the markets, sending share plunging and energy prices spiking as the Chancellor warns of uncertainty for the economy.
Well, coming up on The Wrap, we will be discussing the day's biggest stories with Adam Bolton and Sonia Soda, plus a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including coverage of President Trump's outspoken opinions of the Prime Minister.
Good evening from Jerusalem. I'm Yalda Hakim. This is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with. That was Donald Trump's brutal verdict on Sir Keir Starmer tonight as he vented his frustration with the UK for what he sees as a lack of British support for his war with Iran. We'll assess what the president's words mean for the special relationship in a moment. But first, Sky's Cordelia Lynch reports on the key developments on the fourth day of fighting in America and Israel's war with Iran.
The skies over Iran black with smoke, its ballistic missile infrastructure and arsenal steadily blowing up. In Miravan, an intelligence site obliterated. And here, the wreckage of a building where Iran's assembly of experts were meeting to decide the next supreme leader. Far away in Washington, Donald Trump called the war he helped start stupid, but justified.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that.
Something else he feels very strongly about is Keir Starmer delivering this scathing broadside.
We are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
RAF F-35 jets did shoot down an Iranian drone in Jordan, but for America's leader, it's far too little, too late. This war has rapidly opened a Pandora's box. Iran now targeting 11 countries, drawing out the conflict, expanding the battle, driving up the jeopardy.
This period will pass, and Iran will come out of this historic test victorious. Don't have any doubts. Our civilization, our history, and the God of our homeland will make us victorious. We will defeat the evil.
This is Fujairah oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest oil storage sites in the Middle East. Oman was also hit, a drone smashing into Duqm commercial port. This is the broadest war the region has ever seen. But another big shift to watch is on the ground in southern Lebanon. Israel seizing territory. The IDF say it's just a tactical measure on the border, not part of a wider ground operation. But it could soon become one. For months, there's been speculation about Israel making a major move on Lebanon. When Hezbollah decided to enter the fray by firing rockets, it gave them the chance to justify getting troops on the ground. It is an emboldened nation now trying to seize the opportunity to remake the region. They may frame it as a war of necessity, but it's given them choices. And with no deadline. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
Well, in a moment, we'll be live in Downing Street with John Craig. But first, let's go to Washington and speak to our US correspondent, David Blevins. David, that press conference that President Trump gave in the Oval Office was astonishing, and he didn't hold back in sharing his views on Sir Keir Starmer and frankly, what that actually now means for the special relationship.
Yes, I'm tempted to ask special relationship. What special relationship? By comparing the current occupant of Downing Street to Britain's most iconic wartime leader, President Trump really put the boot in, didn't he? It was vintage Trump, maximalist, theatrical and designed to provoke a response. Why is that? Well, we understand the President is fuming with Keir Starmer for not granting him permission to use UK bases in the early stages of this operation. Now, we're hearing from diplomatic sources in Washington. That's because the Prime Minister had received advice from the Attorney General that without clear evidence of an imminent threat to troops, these strikes would be a breach of international law. And I have to say, the justification for this war continues to be the cause of much debate here on Capitol Hill. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has been briefing members of the House and Senate. Now, yesterday, Rubio suggested that they knew Israel was about to strike, feared that would provoke a response that put US troops in danger, so they took action. Today, when asked if that meant Israel had initiated this war, he said no. In fact, President Trump said he was the person who initiated it. We're also hearing from senior officials at the White House that they took this action because they believed Iran was days or weeks at most from having a nuclear bomb and was negotiating, they say, in a spirit of defiance, not of compromise. Wherever the truth lies, when you think about how long Keir Starmer has been tiptoeing through this political minefield with Donald Trump, including arranging that historic second state visit to the UK, this was quite a broadside. But there are people on both sides of the Atlantic who will argue that the special relationship is much bigger than any one president and any one prime minister and any one issue for that matter.
David, thank you so much. Let's go live now to Downing Street, and our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is waiting for us. And John, I mean, no doubt the government tonight is going into damage control and trying to put their side of the issue out there.
But the Prime Minister remains defiant. Here in number 10, they are pointing to his remarks in the House of Commons during his lengthy statement and question and answer session on Monday, when he said that he talked about President Trump expressing his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. And then the Prime Minister said, but it's my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That's what I've done, and I stand by it. He also said, in answer to the senior Tory backbencher and father of the House, Sir Edward Lee, who talked about, you said you can't impose regime change from the skies. The Prime Minister repeated that. No, you can't impose regime change from the skies. And that remains his position. That was probably the most significant remark he made in the whole of that appearance in the House of Commons. Now, obviously, he faces MPs again in the regular Wednesday Prime Minister's questions. He will be attacked, no doubt, by Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, who believes that he should have said yes to the Americans straight away at the outset. And then, of course, the Lib Dem leader takes the opposite view and wants him to take a more robust line with President Trump. It's worth pointing out the President didn't just mention Churchill. He said he started off by attacking Spain, said he was going to cancel trade with them. And then he said, I'm not happy with the UK either. He went on to talk about the Chagos row, which, of course, he's the deal that he's opposed to. And he complained it had taken the PM 3 or 4 days to work out where we can land. He's talking about the decision that the U-turn, if you like, that the PM made on Sunday evening. He said we were very surprised. He mentioned Churchill twice. He then went on to attack the Prime Minister over this government's policy on energy, talking about how they should be drilling the North Sea, talked about them buying energy from the Norwegians who are taking it from the North Sea, and immigration policy. And he talked about Sharia law, which, of course, was another attack on his old foe, Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan, of course, hit back by saying that the mayor is still clearly living rent-free in Donald Trump's head. He's obsessed with him. Sadiq could probably claim squatters' rights. So the Prime Minister, of course, as he mentioned in his common statement, talked about Iraq. The Labour Party is still haunted by the spectre of Iraq in 2003, and of course all the way that all turned out. Not many MPs who voted for that or against it are still in the House of Commons. Sir Edward Lee was one of those who voted against. On that occasion, Ian Duncan Smith, who was Conservative leader, came here to Downing Street and was talked into Tory MPs voting for the Iraq war by Tony Blair. But there were some rebels. There was a huge number of Labour rebels, about 130 or so. That got through on Tory votes. Kemi Badenoch asked if she would do the same if there's a vote on Iran, said, well, there's not going to be a blank cheque. But clearly, the House of Commons is deeply divided on this. There's the spectre of and the haunting, the Iraq war haunting Labour on one side, and, of course, the Tories, who insist they're not gung-ho, but they want the Prime Minister to do more to support President Trump. John, thank you so much for bringing us up to date.
Well, that outburst from Donald Trump came despite the RAF shooting down Iranian drones over Jordan and after the Prime Minister had announced that the UK will send a warship and anti-drone helicopters to Cyprus. Let's go live now to Cyprus and speak to our Europe correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. And Ali, I mean, despite the Prime Minister being reluctant about getting involved, he has sort of been dragged into it.
Yeah, he has, and I think some will say it was inevitable that Britain, like others, have been dragged into a regional conflict that the Iranians had often threatened. The British RAF base here doesn't just house British RAF personnel. There are Americans here as well. There have been for many, many, many years. And also Cyprus is incredibly close to the Middle East. It's half an hour's flying time from Tel Aviv or Beirut. So I don't think it's a surprise that Cyprus has been the target on a couple of occasions by Iranian or possibly Hezbollah drones. Then you've got the fact that there's a lot of British military personnel based around the region, particularly in the Gulf states. And so they have decided, after those two drone attacks, to send a British warship here, a Type 45 destroyer, which is very capable when it comes to shooting down ballistic missiles. But it's something that they, the British military sort of lack in large numbers, but the Type 45 destroyers can do it. And two helicopters that can shoot down drones, if any more, are fired at RAF Akrotiri or elsewhere. And then British RAF pilots have also been involved defending Middle Eastern countries. The Ministry of Defence released a video of RAF jets shooting down drones over Jordan over the last 24 hours. The RAF have also been involved doing the same with the Qatari Air Force, and we understand they've shot down some drones over Iraq as well. So, you know, it's not an offensive operation. They're not with the Americans and the Israelis attacking Iran. But if Keir Starmer wanted to turn his back on this mission, this operation, this war, then he's being turned around and he is being brought into it, whether he likes it or not.
Ali, thank you so much. Now, almost 900 people are reported to have been killed in the war. Let's just have a look. The vast majority are in Iran, where the Red Crescent Society has reported at least 787 deaths. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes have killed 40 people, while retaliatory strikes by Iran on Israel have killed 11. There have also been deaths in strikes across the region since the start of the war, including 3 in the United Arab Emirates. And the Pentagon has confirmed that 6 U.S. personnel have been killed after a strike on an operations center in Kuwait. In Iran, funerals were held today for more than 165 people, most of them schoolgirls, reported to have been killed on the first day of U.S. and Israeli strikes, as Lisa Holland reports.
Their tiny coffins were piled one on top of another and driven through the centre of the southern Iranian city of Minab in a mass funeral. Iran says mostly little girls of primary school age died with their teachers as they studied. They gathered as far as the eye could see, angry and distraught at such a devastating loss of life in what is the deadliest single incident since hostilities began last Saturday. This was the aftermath of the school attack. Israel says it's not aware of any Israeli or American strikes in the area at the time, but there's been an international outcry that a place of learning has been bombed without accountability. But these are attacks Israel has claimed responsibility for. The fighters are in the sky. They're hitting hard, says an Iranian who filmed the bombardment. Israel says it destroyed the command centre for Iran's entire armed forces as it hit the capital in wave after wave of strikes. Barakella, meaning bravo or well done, he says. Israel's Air Force has also been in action, picking off missile launchers and defence systems from the air. There's already widespread damage. But as Israel and America warned more than 1 million people to leave their homes as it tries to dismantle the regime's infrastructure, there was defiance on the streets.
Curse be upon your ancestors, Trump. The Americans think they can force us to surrender with missiles, but they can't do this kind of things. We will definitely defeat them. We're not afraid of being killed.
Iran isn't done yet. The Fars news agency, which is close to the IRGC, the military defenders of the regime, released this footage, which it says shows huge underground stockpiles of drones and missiles ready to be deployed. We can't independently verify the pictures. We don't know when it was filmed or even if the images are real. What we can say is Iran's propaganda war rages on as Donald Trump doubles down on his campaign from the air. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Well, strikes have also rocked the Beirut skyline as the Israeli military ramped up operations in Lebanon against the Iran-backed militia group Hezbollah. The IDF says its soldiers are now also operating on the ground in southern Lebanon. Our international correspondent John Sparks has this report.
It is the war that few in Lebanon seem to want, but that won't make it go away. Beirut's southern suburbs were repeatedly hit by the Israelis, the streets convulsed by smoke and rubble. The majority here are Shia Muslims, where Hezbollah draws much of its support. And the people of this district feel decidedly insecure. They're targeting all Muslims, but particularly the Shia, said this man. The strikes here in Beirut and in the city of Sidon to the south were triggered by Hezbollah's decision to fire rockets into Israel after the assassination of Ali Khamenei. But their members have not retreated nor disappeared, responding to these attacks with more volleys of their own and plenty of fighting talk. But the Israel Defense Force enjoys total air superiority. An Israeli pilot's view of Beirut here. And it's sending more troops into southern Lebanon to seize new strategic positions, said the defense minister. His boss, the pleased-looking Israeli prime minister, was meeting members of the military and warning the situation in Lebanon would only get worse.
Hezbollah made a very big mistake when it attacked us. We have already responded with force, and we will respond with even greater and additional force. The Lebanese government needs to understand, and the Lebanese people need to understand, that Hezbollah is dragging them into a war that is not theirs.
Dozens of evacuation orders have been issued by the Israelis, warning residents to seek shelter before strikes. But they're not always provided. In the district of Dahia in Beirut, the IDF struck without warning shortly before we were due to visit. Our tour of Dahia, which had been organized by Hezbollah's media arm, has been cancelled. It's just too dangerous to go down there, particularly for them. One of the most densely populated areas of one of the region's greatest cities. It's now cut off. It's totally out of reach. Well over 60,000 people have been displaced by the bombing, and we saw the car parks and the side streets that surround Beirut's central mosque transform into an emergency campground. Rabi and his family have fled from Dahia, and they felt utterly powerless.
Look at the situation we are in. We want to live. We want to live. They are not allowing us to live. We are the smallest country, and everyone else controls it. What's going to happen to us?
Some were looking for people to blame. We heard this family argue about whether Hezbollah were responsible when it fired a volley of rockets on Sunday. The military conflict in Lebanon is fast turning into a humanitarian crisis. A collective state of exhaustion has already set in. John Sparks, Sky News in Beirut.
Well, we can already see how this conflict is spreading across this region and having global implications as well, especially on the global economy. It's unclear, though, when and how this war will actually end. But for now, Anna, back to you in the studio.
Yalda, thank you very much indeed. So a big transatlantic rift tonight as Donald Trump loses faith, it appears, in Sir Keir Starmer. So let's bring in our guests then, Adam Bolton and Sonia Soda. And your headlines from today, it is presumably that tongue-lashing that we saw from the White House.
Yeah, I think there are no good options now for the Prime Minister. His initial caution certainly played well, as far as we can tell, with the British public and with his own party. But I'm afraid he now doesn't look like a leader at all. He seems to be in a very contradictory position.
Sonia?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult going forward. We don't live in a world where clear lines are available to us. We're living in a world which is now just in a new war. And I think the idea that Britain isn't inevitably going to get drawn in more to this extremely complicated situation is for the birds.
Well, certainly we'll take a look at the front pages at 10:30. Not such happy reading, as you might expect, for number 10 Downing Street. But the economic consequences of this war are already being felt in the markets. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones closed down more than 400 points. The FTSE 100 and other markets also fell. That and soaring energy prices overshadowed the Chancellor's spring forecast. Here's our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, with his assessment.
Now, normally when the government unveils a big set of forecasts, which has just happened with the spring forecast, we'd be talking all about that. But obviously there's so much going on with the Iran war and also the implications for the rest of us. It's worth starting by focusing on that. And we'll start with this. This is showing you the wholesale gas price in the UK, the month-ahead gas price, which is typically the one that your bills are based on, but not immediately. So anything happening here won't affect you potentially until the second half of the year. Look at what has just happened here. In the past 2 days, that is up by 98%. Basically, it has doubled over the past 2 days. And two things to note here. First of all, obviously, that looks very scary and very high. Worth saying, if I take the same data and kind of go back, not just the past year, but go all the way back to 2021, what you can see here, that rise, which is basically what I've just shown you there with a different axis, that's the highest since late 2022, but it's nothing like what we saw in the early years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, the rate at which it's changing is pretty much unprecedented. So I want to do the same thing, same data, but rather than looking at the overall levels, this is just looking at the extent to which it changes over any kind of 48-hour period. So, you know, it's up, down, up, down, up, down all the time. But here's what's significant. The latest 48 hours, the rise over that period, basically doubling, is the biggest two-day increase that we have seen ever. So it's actually bigger than any two-day period in the first 2 years of the Ukraine war. So levels are much lower for the time being, thankfully, but the rise is much quicker, much more of a shock on the system. And of course, the big question is now, how long does that last? But what we do know is if it lasts a while, it's going to have a bearing on everything else. And here's one way of thinking about that. We've just had these latest numbers from the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, about inflation in the UK. They are based on the assumption that gas prices, this is kind of a forward curve for gas prices, as known, that gas prices stay low. So that's what's baked into the latest forecast from the government. But this is what's just happened. So the price curve has changed completely, suggesting prices are, you know, going pretty much through the roof and then potentially coming down in 2028 or so. And based on that, you have to look at numbers like this. These are the latest inflation forecasts. So that the blue bar is last time around, red bar is this time around. And basically, well, look, inflation's really flat based on this. But if that's not the case, if energy prices push it up, it could be very different indeed. This is showing you kind of one estimate of that. It's from Capital Economics, and they've basically taken their inflation forecast and said, well, look, let's think about a few scenarios. Let's imagine that there is an energy price shock, but it's temporary. Doesn't change things all that much. Inflation still stays close to that dotted line, 2%, which is the Bank of England's forecast. If it's a bigger shock, so energy prices kind of going higher, then, yeah, it's a little bit higher. If it's a longer-lasting shock, then you're not talking about 2%. You're talking about maybe getting towards 3%. All of which is why, you know, this has a bearing on everything, on our livelihoods, on interest rates as well, and it means that the energy price shock we might be just about to live through could have serious consequences.
Well, it certainly felt like we've been here before with Ukraine, for example. Our contingencies there. Do you get the sense the government is prepared for what might come our way?
Well, to the extent that you can ever be prepared for a global shock like this. There was something just a bit weird, I suppose, today about having the spring statement, Rachel Reeves standing up, talking to the Commons about these little slivers of positive economic news that have been coming in. And really, her thunder's kind of stolen by what's happening globally, not just diplomatically across the world, but this spike in oil prices that we're seeing. And so we're sort of talking about the OBR forecasts that were done before anyone had any kind of idea that this was going to be happening. And indeed, you had the OBR release another statement today to warn about the consequences of this for the British economy. But at the same time, we know there is this big global news that is likely to send up inflation and send up borrowing costs and make those numbers that the OBR have crunched look worse than they are. So it's certainly not the government's fault, but it did put us in a slightly weird kind of position today, I think, when we were basically debating forecasts in the Commons that everyone knows is outdated.
So a sliver sunk by the Strait of Hormuz, despite, after that, Donald Trump coming forward suggesting they might have backup insurance. And in fact, actually, they might have military escorts for some of the tankers who want to go there. Clearly, there is an effort underway to try and keep that really important shipping lane open, Adam. Yeah, and you can see why, looking at the front of the Financial Times, the Mideast energy shock batters markets, and also saying, as far as this country is concerned, that the OBR itself did say that the economy is at risk of a very significant hit as a result of this war. Donald Trump clearly, as we know, is a man who watches the markets very, very closely, clearly doing what he can to reassure. But at the moment, as we were hearing there, both petroleum and gas production in the Gulf, which takes a very significant proportion of the world's supplies, is well down. Yeah, indeed. So oil shipments have been largely blocked through the Strait of Hormuz, which is this narrow waterway between Iran and Oman, through which around a fifth of the world's shipping travels. Shipping companies and insurers, largely, to be fair, based in London, have begun reassessing their exposure to the region, suggest that the war risk premiums have jumped 3 times, I read in one section, and some providers have scaled back or withdrawn coverage. Basically, it means you cannot fund yourself going through that. But if America provides both military escorts and basic insurance as well through what they call the Development Finance Corporation to provide at a very reasonable price, Donald Trump said in a Truth Social post, political risk insurance and guarantees for the financial security of all maritime trade. Suggestion also that China was putting pressure on Iran because it needs what comes out of Qatar as well in terms of LNG. So, you know, this is a global situation we're looking at, just in that map alone, aren't we? But there is reporting and evidence emerging that this was planned by the Iranians, that according to one report in the Financial Times, the Iranian leadership, including the Ayatollah, actually sort of worked out that they might be assassinated and gave instructions to individual units just to cause as much disruption as they could across the whole Gulf, including with Arab nations, and of course, obviously, to the economic lines of supply, in the hope that basically the West and the United States would get tired of this economic disruption before they did and would effectively leave their successors in place. Adam, we're going to come on to that because it directly impacts what Keir Starmer has done or has not done, that very, very point. Let's take a look, shall we, at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers in full now, starting with the Metro. We've seen the FT there. Leads on Donald Trump's warning to Iran's leaders that it is now too late to negotiate a peace deal, saying everything's been knocked out. On the front of the Telegraph, words from Trump that Starmer is no Churchill. The Eye also leading on Trump's criticism of Starmer. A similar front page for the Daily Mail, which also focuses on the fact that the UK warship, the HMS Prince of Wales, is not being deployed by Starmer. It's an aircraft carrier, in fact, isn't it? The Times mentions Trump's comments on Starmer and the decision to send HMS Dragon to Cyprus. As we saw on the front of the Financial Times, the rattling of the global markets caused by fears of a prolonged shock to energy prices from the war in the Middle East. The Sun leads on Starmer's decision to send HMS Dragon to Cyprus to defend the RAF base, which was attacked. The Guardian focuses on the intensification of attacks on Iran from the US and Israel. So lots to discuss then. Sonia, why don't we kick off with so much of the coverage about what Trump had to say about Starmer, not happy with him for the decision not to let us use our bases, and then a full-on rant about, you know, the prospect of Sharia law in this country, immigration more broadly, and so on. So, you know, where does it leave relations?
Well, not in a good place. I have to say, Trump is an incredibly difficult president to strategise a relationship around. So I do feel kind of deeply sorry for Keir Starmer on that level. I think that nothing short of probably giving in and doing what the Americans wanted us to do, which was to let them use our bases, particularly Diego, the one in the Chagos Islands, in order to launch the strikes in Iran. I think anything short of that was going to make Trump really, really irate. Is it surprising that he's chosen to attack Starmer so openly? I mean, gosh, if it was any other US president, it would be completely unheard of and shocking. But this is the kind of guy that Donald Trump is. If you get on his wrong side, he doesn't do diplomacy in the normal way. And so this is you know, the reaction that he's had. And I just think, what can we do? I'm not sure what we can do to sort of... He's obviously going to be quite angry with us for quite some time, I think.
Well, let's take a look at the Times, shall we? Very dramatic picture from Tehran, but a similar theme. The PM is no Churchill, says Trump as tensions rise. Let's listen to the rest of the criticism then from Donald Trump.
I will say the UK has been very, very uncooperative with that stupid island that they have, that they gave away and took a 100-year lease, having to do with perhaps indigenous people claiming the island that never even saw the island before. What's that all about? And they ruin relationships. It's a shame. It's and that country, UK, and I love that country. I love it. My mother was born there. I love it. My mother was born there. My father was born. Right, he knows all about my father. My father was born there, so, you know, very places that you sort of automatically very feel warmly about. But the UK, what they're doing with energy and what they're doing with immigration is horrible.
Well, this has been picked up by so many of the newspapers. You're looking at a picture there on the front of the Daily Mail of what they call the Navy's fleet flagship, HMS Prince of Wales. It's one of our 2 aircraft carriers, both of which are docked as well. That one's in Portsmouth Harbour. We are sending a Type 45 frigate, Adam. Why we didn't send it before is a question everybody's asking. Why we didn't decide to let bases be used for defences purposes after this attack, we don't know. So it's one thing being principled about international law, but he's changed his mind on the principle already. So where does it leave the principle that Keir Starmer's teaching?
Well, he would say he hasn't changed his mind. The Prime Minister would say he hasn't changed his mind because British forces, albeit belatedly, are still being used in defensive capacity. However, I think the point is that was a vicious, calculated attack by the president, basically saying, if you cross me, I'm going to go in, you know, studs up, because he was basically adopting Reform UK talking points on the day that Reform UK continues to be heading the opinion polls, criticising the energy policy, going into detail on the North Sea, mocking the UK for shutting down its own North Sea while buying it from Norway, on immigration, attacking Sharia law, but also Sir Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, But the key to it, and you could see there right at the beginning, although we didn't seem to have problems coming up with the word Chagos or indeed Diego Garcia, is that Keir Starmer, as part of this international law strategy, took the decision before the Americans launched their attack to deny them the use of Diego Garcia. And I have to say, that seems a very odd thing to do, bearing in mind that the whole painful deal with Mauritius over the Chagos Islands was designed to keep Britain and America able to operate out of the base in Diego Garcia. That's what the British got the Americans to agree with. And then the first time the Americans want to use it, suddenly they're told they can't. So you know, what is the logic now of the Chagos Islands deal?
He is not alone in questioning the lawfulness of the initial attack. The French president has been speaking tonight, Emmanuel Macron. The United States of America and Israel decided to launch military operations. These were conducted outside the framework of international law, which we cannot approve. Yet history never mourns the executioners of their own people. None will be regretted. So he's making exactly the same point, that this is outside international law. And yet he has decided quite swiftly to go and protect Cyprus, which is an EU country.
It's sort of the way you frame it, isn't it? I think there are three big issues here. The first is, you know, Donald Trump and his unpredictability and the fact that, you know, the world is now at war in a way that it may not have been, well, would not have been if there'd been another American president. The second is the state of our defence system, which you just can't lay solely at the door of Keir Starmer, because the guy's been Prime Minister for less than 2 years.
But you could predict that RAF Akrotiri might be a target and send HMS
we
Dragon.
Look very
at any point
we look very
in the last 6 weeks.
We look very flat-footed, don't we? The fact that actually France can get support over to Cyprus.
One of them's arrived, one of their vessels, I think, is the Languedoc's arriving tonight.
I completely agree with you that. So there's that issue. And then the third issue, I think, is actually the way that Starmer frames this. To me, he comes across like a lawyer who can't wait to lecture us all about international law. And international law is important, and he's not the only person to say that the original strikes, the original action by Israel and the US were unlawful. Fine, he can say that. But to go on and on and on about international law and to frame everything that the UK is doing solely by reference to... It just feels like the wrong tone for a British Prime Minister.
But it's not about that. It is about defending UK assets in the region, and that could have been predicted. As you said, this was Khamenei's plan, that it would cause regional chaos and very quickly, and that is exactly what we've seen. This was predicted, and we look flat-footed.
We do look flat-footed, but also we are in a different position from Germany, France, let alone Australia, and Canada, because we, along with Spain, are the only countries who actually obstructed what Trump wanted to do, rightly or wrongly. I think almost nobody, and you just read out what the French are saying, actually wanted this to happen. But once it happened, the question then comes...
The situation changes.
Who are our allies, particularly when we're coming under attack?
Yeah.
And frankly... Keir Starmer and the government do not appear to have thought that through, and they're now trying to catch up, just as they're trying to catch up with bringing...
I mean, it's a pretty obvious question, isn't it? Like, sure, it might be unlawful, the original action, but whose side are you on, America or Iran? I mean, that, to me,
and this is Donald Trump
pretty obvious answer to that.
The Sun is making absolutely clear how it feels. It has a picture of, no doubt, a very capable HMS Dragon, but it looks pretty small compared to the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier, the pride of its fleet that the French are sending. Certainly the Telegraph Online are suggesting or asking the question, is this the biggest humiliation ever for the UK's Royal Navy? So, I mean, is that unfair, do you think?
Well, the Telegraph also on its front page below that Starmer is no Churchill jibe, which is classic Trump, you know, it's memorable, is a story about how our aircraft carrier is...
Both of them are stuck at home.
...is in dock, not available for operations.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
Maintenance again. I mean, you know, they cost billions. So, you know, did we not plan? Did we not think about this? Did we not war game this properly? The degradation of our navy and other military is becoming absolutely apparent. Spain is clearly in the sights of Donald Trump because they're not signing up to the greater expenditure that he is demanding in terms of a proportion of
also
GDP.
Because they've stopped the use of their NATO bases for the Americans.
And he's threatened to sort of stop all trade with them. So what this means for our trade policy and tariffs going forwards, I mean, obviously we've got the fallout with the Supreme Court in the US, but we will have to...
Should say one thing, though. I think Keir Starmer is quite comfortable with this position. I don't think he'll be that upset because British public opinion shows that nearly 50% of people oppose the action. Certainly within the Labour Party, taking this stance is quite popular. And in a sense, one gets the sense that, Starmer did his best. He sucked up to Trump. But now, sort of with the departure of Peter Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney and Tim Allen and others, the kind of new Labour people are out the way. And now we're seeing the true Starmer, who is this soft left international lawyer. And that does appeal to his own party. And so I think he's comfortable with all of this. I think the difference is that, as the opinion polls also show, the Sky Times poll, it's not playing with the voters overall.
Yeah, Green's in second place, that show, didn't it? I'm not sure his Home Secretary is sounding very soft left at the moment. Adam, just a bit of breaking news. The government has immediately halted all study visas from Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar and Sudan, and work visas for Afghans. The Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said migrants from these countries are seeking to exploit our generosity. She's still playing tough.
She is, and it's a source of great controversy, I think it's fair to say, within the Labour Party following the by-election last week. Feels like it was a month ago now, but it was only last week, about what direction should the party go in. So, on the right of the party, you've got figures like Shabana Mahmood. Shabana Mahmood, I have to say, she's certainly one of the most competent cabinet ministers in the sense that she seems to be one of the few who's able to just tell her department that she wants things to be done and she is going to get them done and has some policies and sort of announces them and sees them through. But these are really controversial within Labour because some people see her tougher policies on legal migration, so saying that you need to be in the country longer before you can get indefinite leave to remain. She wants to introduce tougher policies on asylum, so she wants asylum to be only available on a temporary basis to refugees coming to the UK, following what Denmark has done. These are seen as quite tough policies within her party and seen, I suppose, as taking on reform, playing reform at their game. And people on the left of the party really do not want it.
Yes, people are criticising the, short visas as anti-assimilation, anti-giving the best to the UK and, very problematic. Adam, a thought on that, or do you want to go back to the...
Well, a thought on that is that even before we got the result that the Greens had won the by-election last week, there was already briefing from within the Labour Party against Shabana Mahmood, saying that chasing reform, look what happens, you chase reform with policies like Shabana Mahmood's and you come third in the by-election.
Yeah. Just let's show you the Metro as we go off as well. Quoting Trump, suggesting it is too late to talk, also with pictures, if we can get it. I'm not sure we can now, I might have moved on. With pictures above of Iran and what they say is the grief of coffins believed to be school pupils on a track surrounded by thousands of mourners, and that is in Minab in Iran. And certainly the UN suggests there should be an investigation into that, what looks like a school bombing in which well over 160 young people lost their lives. That was the reports we're getting. It is very difficult, as you can imagine, for us to verify that here.
As we understand it, the school was near a defence installation, but the bomb unfortunately fell short.
Yeah, OK. Plenty happening, obviously, across the region as well. We'll come back with more breaking lines and the rest of the news in just a moment.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous.
We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Liberation Day. By popular demand,
Wow.
here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Tell us who you're looking for.
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shots rang out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
But what happens now?
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
Well, taking a look at newspapers, two new newspapers in. There is the Daily Mirror, Enter the Dragon, talking about the Type 45 frigate, which is finally being deployed to Cyprus. Will take just under a week to get there. And also the Daily Star on more domestic matters, panic at the pumps. People are being urged to shop for fuel in a normal fashion. That is the latest there. Forecast chaos as war sees fuel prices soar. But it has been a fast-moving day in this fast-moving war with Iran. Our security and defence expert Michael Clark has been assessing the key developments of the conflict so far. Here he is.
In the fourth day of the Iran war, a few things have already become pretty clear. One is that it's a whole regional war, from the Eastern Mediterranean and the Levant through to the Gulf and Iran itself, and look who the neighbours are, into Asia. So it's a big regional confrontation of various sorts. Second pattern is the attacks that the Americans and the Israelis are landing on Iran, lots of different places, and this represents about 2,000 different targets so far. Undoubtedly, there'll be more before too long. Look at the way the Iranians are responding. They've gone up the escalation ladder quite quickly from the beginning. They're attacking the whole region, from Aquaterian Cyprus through to the Gulf. Even Oman, one of their friends off this map, but Duqm has been attacked. In particular, they're laying a lot of stress on attacking facilities that matter to Saudi Arabia. And they have made it very clear that they intend to close the Strait of Hormuz, even though closing it is difficult, but making the Strait of Hormuz dangerous has the same effect as closing it. And for that reason, the United States is now talking about sending some troop reinforcements to the region for various reasons, not unreasonable, and increasing their tactical air support, TAC Air. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, said we'll be sending more TAC Air. He didn't say what, but one would imagine it might be more F-15s, more F-35s. These are capable of bombing targets on the ground and assisting in ground operations. We'll see how that plays out. While this is going on, there is another war as part of this. The Israelis, given that they were attacked by Hezbollah with rockets in Lebanon, have begun to move against Lebanon again, Hezbollah in Lebanon, as they said they would. And if we zoom in on that a little bit, you can see what the Israelis are doing. First of all, they've called up a lot of their reserves. They're moving northwards. We're not sure how far yet, towards the Litani River. They may or may not cross the Litani River. But most important of all, they've begun to, as they say in air power, go downtown in Beirut, attacking targets, particularly in southern Beirut, which is the Hezbollah heartland. And the Israelis are making it pretty clear that they are going to try to deal with Hezbollah once and for all as a result of this particular operation. So, when we think about how this all plays out, Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he has an instrument at his disposal which is extremely precise, a military operation that these days, digitally, can be controlled to a very high degree. But when a military operation is used to fight a war, then it becomes politics. And fighting a war is full of uncertainties. Whereas Dan Kane can control the military operation, Donald Trump may be losing some control over the war that he has initiated as a result of all of this. It all goes to prove the old adage, really, that wars are a lot easier to start than they are to finish. And as they say, strategy without tactics is just daydreams. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Somehow, the successful commanders have got to get tactics and strategy in balance. Not clear yet that the Americans quite have.
Professor Michael Clark there. So how might the Iran war be brought to an end? Is it too soon to ask that question? Well, the former CIA chief, General David Petraeus, told my colleague Yalda Hakim that success for the US and Israel may hinge on sections of Iran's armed forces turning against the regime. He also said the path to an end to the conflict will likely require boots on the ground.
Air power alone is not going to bring down a regime. These are not the color revolutions either, where just popular sentiment can topple regimes in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, as we saw in Eastern Europe and former Soviet republics. There's going to have to be some kind of ground force. Sadly, in such situations, it is the guys with the most guns and the willingness to be the most ruthless that often prevail. And I think that's the big question.
Yes, how to bring about an end, an off-ramp for everybody is very interesting. And presumably, like in 1979 and the Iranian Revolution, it requires the Iranian army to say it will not fire at people if they take to the streets and separate themselves from the IRGC.
Yeah, which is a pretty big ask. I mean, you remember David Petraeus was the person who went into Iraq in the surge when actually more troops were put in an attempt to bring order and to win over some of the forces on the ground that were fighting to the Allied, the American side. So he knows about these things. And interestingly today, Trump did not exactly say no, never to boots on the ground. He seemed to leave it open, but that would be a really dramatic development in this war. And, you know, it's pointed out that there are only about 50,000 American troops in the zone, whereas at the height of the Iraq war, there were 500,000, so 10 times as many.
David Petraeus has made it absolutely clear that mistakes were made in Iraq, for example, disbanding the Iraqi army and effectively the civil service, because many of them were Baathists, although they were, he said, some of them were Western educated and good people and could have been very useful. And this was a fundamental error to dismantle effectively government and military in Iraq.
Although as far as leadership, the interesting thing today is Trump is saying they've almost been too successful, that initial strike
it's taken out too many people.
Took out the people they were talking to that they hope might come in, as happened in Venezuela, to really keep things stable.
Quick 30 seconds, apologies.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, in terms of thinking about where this goes, you know, maybe one of the scariest outcomes is after a little while, America just thinks this is too messy and walks away from it and leaves the thing far, far messier than it was at the start.
Well, certainly on the ground, it is still happening. Syria, we read, has been sending thousands of troops to reinforce its border with Lebanon amid an expanding regional conflict. Israel's UN envoy says that Israel and US have control over almost all of Iranian airspace, which would be very significant in terms of their campaign. And in terms of proxies too, Islamic resistance in Iraq says it's carried out 27 attacks against enemy bases in Iraq and the region since dawn today. All of that to come, more coverage of this.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is why it hasn't been stopped.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think?
It's really unusual.
Mornings with Roger and Frost.
Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Tonight on The Wrap, has the Iran war ended the special relationship? President Trump unleashes a stinging personal attack on the Prime Minister, accusing him of being uncooperative over the conflict.
So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
The president's rebuke came despite RAF jets shooting down Iranian drones over Jordan and a UK decision to deploy a warship to Cyprus. And while the politicians argue US and Israeli strikes on Iran continue for a fourth day, America says it's now hit more than 1,700 targets. Tehran continues to retaliate, attacking American allies and US bases in the Gulf, as well as targets in Israel. The continuing war rattles the markets, sending shares plunging and energy prices spiking as the Chancellor warns of uncertainty for the economy. Well, coming up, we will be discussing the day's biggest stories with Adam Bolton and Sonia Soda, plus a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, including coverage of President Trump's outspoken opinions of the Prime Minister. Well, good evening to you. Good evening to Sonia and to Adam. This is not Winston Churchill we are dealing with. That was Donald Trump's brutal verdict on Sir Keir Starmer tonight as he vented his frustration with the UK for what he sees as a lack of British support for the war with Iran. Adam, extraordinary to hear.
Yeah, quite extraordinary. A very detailed attack, really, on Keir Starmer and his policies going through immigration, energy and everything else, and clearly shows that the president is furious about the refusal to let him use Diego Garcia, the Chagos Island base, in this attack on Iran.
Sonia.
Donald Trump is the most unpredictable American president we have ever seen, so it's always going to be difficult for Keir Starmer to handle him around this decision not to let the Americans use UK bases. But actually what's interesting is I think we've seen Starmer really sort of, obviously not at that level, but he's ramped up the rhetoric himself. He said that Britain doesn't believe in regime change from the skies. That's really pretty kind of strong criticism from a UK Prime Minister of the US.
Well, we'll certainly talk more about what the president's words mean for the so-called special relationship in a moment. First, Sky's Cordelia Lynch reports on the key developments on the fourth day of fighting in America and Israel's war with Iran.
The skies over Iran, black with smoke. Its ballistic missile infrastructure and arsenal steadily blowing up. In Miravan, an intelligence site obliterated. And here, the wreckage of a building where Iran's assembly of experts were meeting to decide the next supreme leader. Far away in Washington, Donald Trump called the war he helped start stupid, but justified.
We were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack. If we didn't do it, they were going to attack first. I felt strongly about that.
Something else he feels very strongly about is Keir Starmer delivering this scathing broadside.
We are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
RAF F-35 jets did shoot down an Iranian drone in Jordan, but for America's leader, it's far too little, too late. This war has rapidly opened a Pandora's box. Iran now targeting 11 countries, drawing out the conflict, expanding the battle, driving up the jeopardy.
This period will pass, and Iran will come out of this historic test victorious. Don't have any doubts. Our civilization, our history, and the God of our homeland will make us victorious. We will defeat the evil.
This is Fujairah oil refinery in Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest oil storage sites in the Middle East. Oman was also hit, a drone smashing into Duqm commercial port. This is the broadest war the region has ever seen. But another big shift to watch is on the ground in southern Lebanon. Israel seizing territory. The IDF say it's just a tactical measure on the border, not part of a wider ground operation. But it could soon become one. For months, there's been speculation about Israel making a major move on Lebanon. When Hezbollah decided to enter the fray by firing rockets, it gave them the chance to justify getting troops on the ground. It is an emboldened nation now trying to seize the opportunity to remake the region. They may frame it as a war of necessity, but it's given them choices, and with no deadline. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
Well, let's bring in our guests then, joined too by our chief political correspondent, John Craig. Sonia, look at the newspapers. A Prime Minister who Trump mocks as no Churchill and a Navy fleet stranded in port. You know, the suggestion is this is embarrassing for the PM.
I mean, it is and it isn't. It is obviously not great to have the US president say that about our Prime Minister, that he's no Winston Churchill, and to go on to criticise him really in the strongest of terms. As Adam was saying earlier, he was sort of talking about UK domestic politics, criticising the Prime Minister in relation to immigration, for example. It's really not good. But at the same time, the UK government saw as unlawful, there was always going to be a bit of a blow-up about it. So I'm not sure that there's that much that Starmer could have done. I do think there are questions, though, about what we do now going forwards and how we handle that relationship with the US. Starmer is clearly very, very focused on international law, on drawing this kind of, some might say, academic distinction between defensive and offensive action. He would say it's not academic at all. You know, it is the crux of international law. But I think things could sort of get trickier for us.
Well, his whole shtick has been cosing up to the US president since he came into power, Donald Trump, because of trade deals and so on. Has this blown it up, do you think? And was it an error not to let them use Diego Garcia after the initial attack in order to counter Iranian retaliation?
Well, I think it was an error because the whole point of the controversial Chagos deal was to allow Britain and America to continue to operate their military out of Diego Garcia. And the first test of it, and Keir Starmer turns around to the Americans and says you can't use it. So that does seem to be a little bit of a contradiction, even if it was the right interpretation of this rather nebulous concept of international law. Also, I think there is now embarrassment for the government, which we're certainly seeing on the front of the Daily Mail, on the front of the Telegraph and elsewhere, about the readiness of Britain's depleted armed forces to play a role in this campaign. And you know, pictures of the aircraft carrier HMS Prince that's unavailable on the front of the Mail, and then pictures of the ship which is being sent out, HMS Dragon, which has actually got...
Let's have a look at the paper, shall we? Because you can see HMS Prince of Wales, one of our two aircraft carriers, which, as you said, both of them are in dock under maintenance, to be fair. And what we are sending instead is a Type 45 frigate, which we'll come on to in a moment. But, you know, and the Daily Telegraph is saying, is this the most humiliating moment ever for the British Navy?
I mean, it's not impressive. And the fact of the matter is the French are going to get their naval ships to protect Cyprus there before we are.
Yes, indeed, and Greece is sending too.
And I think, you know, that clearly isn't just Keir Starmer's fault. You know, that it is partly the product of decisions that have been taken really over decades around our levels of defence spending and investment. But there are questions about whether, given that there was always a risk something like this was going to happen, why was there nothingness?
But, I mean, the build-up has been going on for over a month, and you might have thought...
Totally, no, I agree on that.
Yeah, this is predictable. I mean, there's two issues to talk with you. One is that headline, Starmer is no Churchill, and everything we saw in the Oval Office with Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, and the second, of course, the deployment of HMS Dragon. So tackle this one first. What has Downing Street been saying in response to what Trump said?
Well, they're remaining defiant, actually. Now, we should say, first of all, it's not the first time, it's the third time this week that the President has attacked the Prime Minister. First, in an interview in the Daily Telegraph, as they point out in their story, and secondly, in an interview with The Sun, where it was suggested by the interviewer that the Prime Minister was pandering, was the word, to Muslim voters.
But that was after a question from Harry Cole.
That's what I said. It was suggested to him, yes.
Suggested
and
to
he
him,
said
right,
it could be.
Yeah.
But he was critical in his Telegraph interview as well. So the third time. I mean, I listened to it all. He started off by having a go at the Spanish government. The Spanish Prime Minister threatened to cut off all trade with Spain.
They said he can't use...
I don't know if that's...
America can't use their bases.
I don't know if that's going to happen. And then he went on to say, I'm not happy with the UK either. And he talked about the lease and the Chagos and so on. And then he said it's taken 3 or 4 days for us to work out where we can land. And that, of course, is a reference to what was seen as a U-turn by the Prime Minister on Sunday evening. And then, of course, they came up with the... he talked about how it would it would mean more flying hours if they couldn't use the base. Then he came up. First he said, this is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with. And later on he said, this is not the age of Churchill. He said it twice. Now, the Prime Minister, number 10, when we asked them what's his response, pointed us to what he said in the House of Commons on Monday, which was... that the President had expressed his disagreement, not to get involved in the initial strikes. Then he said, but it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That's what I've done, and I stand by it. Now, the Prime Minister also responding to a question from Sir Edward Lee, the father of the House, who incidentally was a Tory rebel on Iraq back in 2003. Edward Lee talked about this, used this phrase, you can't have regime change in the air. And the Prime Minister repeated that, and that was probably the most significant thing he said in the 2 hours in the House of Commons. Now, warships.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember a radio programme called The Navy Lark with Leslie Phillips many years ago.
While you're talking, let's take a look at the Sun, shall we? Which is leading on this, but do continue.
I was going to say, I mean, it is. I mean, you just said there were the two aircraft carriers were both on maintenance. Well, why are they both on maintenance at the same time? And people keep using the word scramble, scrambling a warship. They're not scrambling at all. They're taking their time. Now, I've got the Prime Minister's announcement here. He talked about how he'd had a phone call with the President of Cyprus to let him know we're sending helicopters with counter-drone capabilities and HMS Dragon is to be deployed to the region. But we read that it's going to take 6, 7 or 8 days. Now, I read in one of the papers just now that apparently you have to give the crew 3 days' notice or something. And this business of all these ships... I, as a political correspondent, have covered story after story after story. The Public Accounts Committee, the Defence Select Committee, complaining about the unreadiness of the British Armed Forces, particularly the Navy, all their expensive kit. And, yeah, I mean, I remember also in the Falklands, remember when the Falklands happened? It took them ages to get to the South Atlantic. Well, this is not as far, obviously. But Adam makes the point. We've known about that this has been bubbling up for at least 3 or 4 weeks. Why was there no warship anywhere near Cyprus? And because a lot of people... There has been criticism. I looked it up when we heard the announcement from the Prime Minister. There's been criticism of the fact that there were not any warships in the region beforehand.
Well, we pulled back the last major warship in the region just before Christmas, apparently, the UK. But well, great timing. Great timing, yeah. Anyway, there's the Enter the Dragon from the Daily Mirror. Just a bit of breaking news we're getting, actually, from the Israeli military. It says it has begun a broad wave of strikes now in Iran. Certainly, we heard earlier from Israel's UN envoy, Danny Danon, that Israel and the US have control over almost all of Iranian airspace, is what he was suggesting. But it looks like Israel is once again attacking Iran. Certainly, just before 9 o'clock UK time, we heard more sirens going off in parts of Israel as well. So, it continues for both sides.
Well, we've heard this week from both the American and Israeli leadership that this week their attack is going to be much greater than it was last week. And already, I think casualties on the Israeli side are in the hundreds and, of course, in many more.
It's kind of, it's just not where you want to be, is it, with these two extremely gung-ho leaders in place in both Israel and the US. But it is the world we live in, and the UK has to react to the world we live in, not the world as Starmer wishes it was.
I mean, the big question for Keir Starmer is he says his priority is the British national interest. The question is it in the British national interest to be slagged off by the American president?
But then the president does change his mind every 5 minutes. I mean, he's changed his mind 4 or 5 times on Chagos already in the last few weeks.
Yes, he has, but I mean, it appears, as we see the American decision to attack Iran, that the refusal to allow the Americans to use Chagos is what's infuriating.
Exactly, yes, I agree with that. Just to remind you, Prime Minister's questions tomorrow, noon, and so the Prime Minister will come under attack, no doubt, from Kemi Badenoch, one point of view, should have gone in earlier, and the likes of Sir Edward Davey telling him to be tougher with President Trump.
And maybe the new Green MP as well, because they are anti what feels like imperialist intervention, it seems, does it not, John? So it's going to be very...
Well, I think the Greens are actually anti-NATO.
Well, no, but the interesting thing about the Greens is their kind of gloss on possibly withdrawing from NATO is that they think that there should be European security, which Britain plays part of. And it's interesting, both the comment you read out earlier on from President Macron saying that, yes, this was a contravention of the Americans of international law, but also the fact that Merz, the German leader, was in the Oval Office today and has managed to avoid criticism from Trump, even although, of course, Germany is not cooperating directly.
We didn't hear much from him, did we?
No, but apparently he came out afterwards and did say that he had told Donald Trump that the criticism of Starmer was unjustified, and Spain too, and suggested also, obviously, Spain is part of the European Union, and without Spain, any trade deal, of course, will include Spain. John, I need to move on. I apologise. Thank you very much indeed for now.
I was going to be really brief.
Were you? OK, go for it.
I was only going to say quickly that, of course, Merz, Macron and Starmer have formed this E3 group and have been staunch allies on this whole issue.
OK, that's interesting. Well, there we go. That's probably what...
Particularly in relationship to Ukraine. Reports tonight that Ukraine has attacked a Russian tanker in the Mediterranean.
Yes, just off the coast of Libya. We were reading earlier, weren't we, Adam? Well, let's return to our coverage of the war in Iran now. Almost 900 people are reported to have been killed in the war, the vast majority in Iran, where the Red Crescent Society has reported at least 787 deaths. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes have killed 40 people, while retaliatory strikes by Iran on Israel have killed 11. There have also been deaths in strikes across the region since the start of the war, including 3 in the United Arab Emirates. And the Pentagon has confirmed that 6 US personnel have been killed after a strike on an operations centre in Kuwait. 4 of those have been named this evening. Well, in Iran, funerals were held today for more than 165 people, most of them schoolgirls, reported to have been killed on the first day of US and Israeli strikes, as Lisa Holland now reports.
Their tiny coffins were piled one on top of another and driven through the centre of the southern Iranian city of Minab in a mass funeral. Iran says mostly little girls of primary school age died with their teachers as they studied. They gathered as far as the eye could see, angry and distraught at such a devastating loss of life in what is the deadliest single incident since hostilities began last Saturday. This was the aftermath of the school attack. Israel says it's not aware of any Israeli or American strikes in the area at the time, but there's been an international outcry that a place of learning has been bombed without accountability. But these are attacks Israel has claimed responsibility for. The fighters are in the sky. They're hitting hard, says an Iranian who filmed the bombardment. Israel says it destroyed the command centre for Iran's entire armed forces as it hit the capital in wave after wave of strikes. Barakella, meaning bravo or well done, he says. Israel's Air Force has also been in action, picking off missile launchers and defence systems from the air. There's already widespread damage, but as Israel and America warned more than 1 million people to leave their homes as it tries to dismantle the regime's infrastructure, there was defiance on the streets.
Curse be upon your ancestors, Trump. The Americans think they can force us to surrender with missiles, but they can't do this kind of things. We will definitely defeat them. We're not afraid of being killed.
همه‌شون پیروز میشیم. ما از کشته شدن نمیترسیم.
Iran isn't done yet. The Fars news agency, which is close to the IRGC, the military defenders of the regime, released this footage, which it says shows huge underground stockpiles of drones and missiles ready to be deployed. We can't independently verify the pictures. We don't know when it was filmed or even if the images are real. What we can say is Iran's propaganda war rages on as Donald Trump doubles down on his campaign from the air. Lisa Holland, Sky News.
Yes, the devastation there, as you can see, in Iran. Just a few details then of those 4 US service personnel who have tonight been named. We read that they were all killed by a drone that struck where they'd been working, which is in Port Shuaibia in Kuwait on March the 1st. They were all assigned to the 103rd Sustainment Command, Des Moines, Iowa, and all of them were Army reservists. It was a captain, 2 sergeants and a specialist aged between 20 and 42 years old. So the first of 4 of the 6 US service personnel who have been killed in this. But, I mean, devastation all round. And, you know, at the point we made yesterday and we see today still, is this has sucked in a large part of this region.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just kind of been chaos there. And again, as Adam was saying earlier, that may have been Iran's plan. If there's a strike against us, we'll just kind of basically let all hell break loose in the region. But lots of people, you know, these strikes were obviously originally launched by Israel and the US. But as soon as you get missiles going across, you know, all across the Middle East, strikes against, you know, we saw explosions in Dubai, Qatar's been drawn in. You just can't contain it, and there's no way that we've already been drawn in now. We're allowing the US to use our bases defensively. What is the difference between defensive and offensive when British bases are being attacked in Cyprus? It would be nice to think that we live in a world where there is a lot of order, where international law reigns, where the nation-states come together at the United Nations and say this is lawful, this isn't lawful. We don't live in that world. Donald Trump has decided to launch action. And, you know, quite frankly, at one level, the question is, are you on America's side or Iran's side? And as far as I'm concerned, there's only one answer to that question.
Well, just a reminder as well, the Israeli military says it has now launched a broad wave of strikes in Iran overnight again. Obviously, the first strikes were on at 9:45, weren't they? Because they presumably had intelligence of where the Ayatollah was, alongside very senior leaders in Iran. But Adam, you know, the devastation we're seeing. We'll come on to the economic consequences in a moment. But it's sucked so many nations in, has it not? This
yeah, and that appears to have been a strategy from the Iranian leadership. Was in the event of attack, where they appear to have accepted that the leadership might have been assassinated, independent forces or independent sites in Iraq were basically told to attack as many people as possible and to cause as much mayhem as possible, because that would clearly create economic pressure, as indeed it has, as we've seen in the reports on gas and oil prices, but also disruption of air traffic and the rest of it. That would create pressure, which the Iranians hoped, or the leadership hoped, that they could outlast the patience of America and its allies, and therefore remain in post in some kind of settlement.
Well, Iran's proxies too, as we call them, they call them allies, have also reacted. Obviously, Hezbollah in Lebanon, leading to boots on the ground there by the Israelis, and also Islamic resistance in Iraq as well, which says it's carried out 27 attacks just today in Iraq and across the region. And I'm just seeing, actually, there's a statement that's just come in from the Saudi leadership, from their cabinet, suggesting that Saudi Arabia will take all necessary measures to defend its security, as other Gulf states have said too. Should we talk about the economic consequences of the war? Certainly being felt in the markets. On Wall Street, the Dow closing down more than 400 points, the FTSE 100, other markets also falling. That and soaring energy prices overshadowed the Chancellor's spring forecast today. Let's listen then to our economics and data editor, Ed Conway.
Now, normally when the government unveils a big set of forecasts, which has just happened with the spring forecast, we'd be talking all about that. But obviously there's so much going on with the Iran war and also the implications for the rest of us. It's worth starting by focusing on that. And we'll start with this. This is showing you the wholesale gas price in the UK, the month-ahead gas price, which is typically the one that your bills are based on, but not immediately. So anything happening here won't affect you potentially until the second half of the year. Look at what has just happened here. In the past 2 days, that is up by 98%. Basically, it has doubled over the past 2 days. And two things to note here. First of all, obviously, that looks very scary and very high. Worth saying, if I take the same data and kind of go back not just the past year, but go all the way back to 2021, what you can see here, that rise, which is basically what I've just shown you there with a different axis, that's the highest since late 2022, but it's nothing like what we saw in the early years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, the rate at which it's changing is pretty much unprecedented. So I want to do the same thing, same data, but rather than looking at the overall levels, this is just looking at the extent to which it changes over any kind of 48-hour period. So, you know, it's up, down, up, down, up, down all the time. But here's what's significant. The latest 48 hours, the rise over that period, basically doubling, is the biggest two-day increase that we have seen ever. So it's actually bigger than any two-day period in the first 2 years of the Ukraine war. So levels are much lower for the time being, thankfully, but the rise is much quicker, much more of a shock on the system. And of course, the big question is now, how long does that last? But what we do know is if it lasts a while, it's going to have a bearing on everything else. And here's one way of thinking about that. We've just had these latest numbers from the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, about inflation in the UK. They are based on the assumption that gas prices, this is kind of a forward curve for gas prices, as known, that gas prices stay low. So that's what's baked into the latest forecast from the government. But this is what's just happened. So the price curve has changed completely, suggesting prices are, you know, going pretty much through the roof and then potentially coming down in 2028 or so. And based on that, you have to look at numbers like this. These are the latest inflation forecasts. So that the blue bar is last time around, red bar is this time around. And basically, well, look, inflation's really flat based on this. But if that's not the case, if energy prices push it up, it could be very different indeed. This is showing you kind of one estimate of that. It's from Capital Economics, and they've basically taken their inflation forecast and said, well, look, let's think about a few scenarios. Let's imagine that there is an energy price shock, but it's temporary. Doesn't change things all that much. Inflation still stays close to that dotted line, 2%, which is the Bank of England's forecast. If it's a bigger shock, so energy prices kind of going higher, then, yeah, it's a little bit higher. If it's a longer-lasting shock, then you're not talking about 2%. You're talking about maybe getting towards 3%. All of which is why, you know, this has a bearing on everything, on our livelihoods, on interest rates as well, and it means that the energy price shock we might be just about to live through could have serious consequences.
Strait of Hormuz, which really is determining much of the change in oil and gas prices that we're seeing. Certainly there's been an intervention from Donald Trump in a Truth Social post. He suggested that he would trigger what he called the Development Finance Corporation to provide a very reasonable price risk insurance and guarantees for the financial security of all maritime trade, and then also suggested that actually there could be military escort too for vessels. We've got the map to show the Strait of Hormuz. There we go. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So there we go. That's what, you know, this is the issue. This tiny strip of land between Iran and when it's the top of the UAE and Oman, isn't it? And so the point is, and it's not the first time the Americans have said they would help to try and get shipping flowing, not least from Qatar, which is LNG as well, which is critical for China, apart from, you know, Iran's oil and so on. So this really does determine much of the price structure around the world, Sonia.
It does, and we in the UK have this kind of weird situation today where we have the Chancellor delivering the spring statement, forecast, I should say, in the Commons. She deliberately called it a forecast, not a statement. And, you know, it was meant to be her opportunity to deliver the little slivers of good economic news that have been coming in. But as she was delivering it, everyone knew, basically, that the forecast was already out of date because We've been seeing oil prices spike. That is going to lead to higher inflation. That is very much the prediction, higher borrowing costs for the government and other governments around the world. And it's going to send all her figures wrong.
So how ready is the government? Let's hear from Rachel Reeves.
With unfolding conflict in Iran and the Middle East, it is incumbent on me and on this government to chart a course through that uncertainty, to secure our economy against shocks and protect families from the turbulence that we see beyond our borders.
So what is the outcome of all of this? Panic at the pumps is the Daily Star. Forecourts chaos as war sees fuel prices surge. This really does throw a spanner in the works, doesn't it, for Rachel Reeves and her prospects of green shoots and growth this year?
Well, yes, it does. And, you know, she was publishing the forecast from the Office of Budget Responsibility, which itself wrote into its blue book today a warning that it could all be blown off course by, as we were hearing from Ed Conway, by this conflict. And again, we got front page of the Daily Star talking about panic at the pumps.
Yeah, people being told to shop for fuel normally, just so as you know, but anyway.
Yeah, but I don't know whether this is going on or not, but certainly the Daily Star is reporting there's panic at the pumps. And then you know, the front page of the Financial Times saying that the energy shock is battering the markets and also stressing that there is a very significant danger to the economy, according to the OBR. So it's certainly very difficult for the government. They can't be blamed for it, but the whole thrust of Rachel Reeves making the best of the forecast was to say that interest rates are going to come down, inflation is going to come down. But if there is a sustained shortage, energy shortage, that's not going to happen. And, of course, again, Keir Starmer, when he was sticking the knife into... when Keir Starmer was having the knife stuck into him by Donald Trump, he, you know, made the point about energy prices in the UK.
Absolutely. Well, the intervention from Trump certainly marks one of the administration's most aggressive steps yet, not least because Trump has made lower fuel costs for Americans central to his economic messaging. He knows how dangerous inflation is for politicians, does he not? He's, you know,
and we've got to say, if we're not getting it out of the Gulf, we're going to need possibly liquid natural gas from the United States. And will Trump be in the mood to facilitate that?
Golly, let's not think about that just yet, shall we? Anyway, we saw the Star. Let's take a look at the other newspapers now as well. There is the Metro, quoting Donald Trump's warning to Iran's leaders that it is now too late to negotiate a peace deal, saying everything's been knocked out. On the front of the Telegraph, words from Trump that Starmer is no Churchill. The Eye also leading on Trump's criticism of Starmer. Similar front page for the Daily Mail, which also focuses on the fact that the UK aircraft carrier, the HMS Prince of Wales, is not being deployed by the government. It is in dock for maintenance. The Times mentions Trump's comments on Starmer 2 and the deployment of HMS Dragon to Cyprus. On the front of the Financial Times, the rattling of the global markets caused by fears of a prolonged shock to energy prices from the war in the Middle East. While the Sun leads on Starmer's decision to send HMS Dragon to Cyprus to defend the RAF base that was attacked. That is it is a Type 45 frigate. The Mirror also focuses on the warship being sent to Cyprus with their headline, Enter the Dragon. The Guardian focusing on the intensifying of attacks on Iran from the US and Israel. And the Mirror as well with their front page or the inside pages? No, let's go to the inside pages. Right, so it was the, what did you call it? Not the spring statement, the spring forecast.
Forecast,
okay.
Yes.
So let's have a look at that. Right plan to help ordinary people. I have to admit, I'm going to be honest with you, I fell asleep during this. I don't know if that was her intention, but anyway.
It may well have been,
no, but I mean,
she wanted to deliver a boring story.
I had a power cut at home and I had to drive off to a car park yesterday, and it was a rather warm car with the spring sunshine coming in. So give me a fat minute on what we learnt, Sonia.
So we learned that there are little green shoots economically. So, things like inflation coming down, a little bit more growth towards the end of the Parliament. Growth next year is forecast to be slow, though, which obviously isn't great news, but little green shoots. Quite marginal green shoots, I have to say. They're not going to give the Chancellor tons of money to spend in the run-up to the next election. In fact, you've had institutes like the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying it all looks pretty unrealistic in the run-up to the next election. So some big spending departments are actually going to be facing real-term cuts. If you look at schools budgets, for example. So it's little green shoots, but the big picture, of course, is it was all delivered against the backdrop of this new global conflict that could send oil prices soaring, which will send inflation soaring, which will send government borrowing costs soaring. So it's not going too badly for them. I would say even on the basis of the OBR's forecast today, it's not going well enough to sort of win them the next election resoundingly, but it could get worse.
Yeah, I think that was my problem. I'd heard Ed Conway say it all might change.
Did I send you to sleep there?
It's the perils of being a shift. Nothing to do with the Chancellor.
There was a very simple message. She said, on the basis of these forecasts, GDP per capita will have increased over this Parliament. And that really was, it's the old say in politics, Ronald Reagan put it very succinctly, are you better off now than you were 4 or 5 years ago? That's the question she says she's going to be judged by. And, of course, if you say that, it's a bit of a hostage to fortune.
Yeah, indeed so. And, of course, we wait for fuel prices to go up, energy costs to go up, inflation to happen, interest rates not to change. Let's look at the Mac cartoon with all of this. Not saying all of that will happen, but that could happen. There we go. There's the Mac cartoon. Is it really necessary to panic buy petrol? We have an electric car. Or presumably electricity prices will go up as well.
Well, that is the thing.
Because they're
so people with electric cars can feel smug when they see queues at the pumps, but their bills will be going up too. So.
And one of the key pledges today was the government is taking, she said, £150 off energy bills.
Yeah. Well, that might swing round, mightn't it, to 2,500 on average, I heard. But anyway, let's do student loans, shall we, compared to phone deals. This is in the Times, page 2. Have you had a chance to look?
Yes, so there were some road shows back, I think it was sort of when tuition fees first tripled. So road shows between 2011 and 2017, where basically, I think it was a company, Event Marketing Solutions, that ran them. I think they may have been contracted by the government. Anyway, they were going out telling students, don't worry about this. It's like having a mobile phone contract, because when you finish university, you'll be paying around £30 a month. That's the same you'd be spending on your mobile phone. I did some quick sums on my calculator earlier. I did some homework, and that assumes a graduate salary of 25k if you're only paying £30 off a month. Now, of course, graduates hope to progress their earnings, and if you speak to people in their late 20s, early 30s today, who aren't earning 25k anymore, they are paying a whole lot more than £30 a month.
And remember, there's been all this protest about the level of student loans. Some people thought that the spring forecast would be an opportunity to address that today, but there was nothing from the Chancellor in what she had to say.
And just in terms of my napping, I see on the page of the Daily Mirror, with the headline, Snore Blimey, we need exactly 7 hours and 19 minutes sleep, according to scientists. So 7 hours and 19 minutes is what we're aiming for.
How many did you get during the spring?
I'm not sure quite how long I slept for.
It just felt like 7 hours.
I really shouldn't confess to this stuff. Anyway, Adam, Labour hits a record low in polls as Greens sought a second place. This is a Sky News Times poll, is it not? Which the Times is covering in the paper.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Reform is still ahead, as they have been for over a year now. But it's the first time the Greens have been ahead of Labour and the Conservatives in second place. And it's they're a good 5 points ahead. On 21% compared to 16% for the two main parties each. And there's no doubt about it, this poll was taken in the immediate aftermath of the by-election in Gorton and Denton. So clearly the Greens with their victor, Hannah Spencer, would have been on people's minds. But it's pretty serious, particularly bearing in mind that Labour designed its campaign as to say it's us or reform. whereas now it looks a bit like it's green oil reform. One thing, perhaps good news, is that in the subsidiary questions in this poll, when people were asked which party will you vote against, it used to be Labour in the lead there, but now Reform UK are clearly in the lead there. That you know, there's a large head of steam of people saying we will vote for whoever will stop reform, and that, of course, may have been what happened in the by-election.
Mm-hmm. Goodness me. Shall we, well, do you want to dwell on that quickly, or I can move on?
Well, I'm just going to say, I mean, it's interesting if you look at the polls as well, that they are saying that, you know, that basically the public are with Keir Starmer in terms of this war with Iran and his decision not to get involved at the very beginning. So perhaps the people around Keir Starmer will hope that he gets a little bit of a lift from that. But I do think that his ratings are so bad now with the public, his personal ratings. It's quite difficult to turn it around, even if you're doing things that are on paper popular.
But these are the same polls. The polls that are showing Labour doing badly are also the ones showing that people agree with Starmer over the war. So there's not, you know...
No, I think that's right.
And we haven't even talked about council tax bills going up, have we? But that's maybe for another day, because they're going up a lot. Anyway, next up we will have more of the insides of the newspapers, and actually there's got some quite interesting, funny ones back in a minute.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome, Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think?
It's really unusual.
Mornings with Rich and Frost.
Let's crack on. Let's get started.
Well, the issue of Ukraine was certainly raised by the German Chancellor in that famous Oval Office meeting today with President Trump, Friedrich Merz raising that. But let's take a look at the inside pages of the Metro now, which is the kit for the Ukrainian Paralympic team, who have been told they cannot wear it because it shows a map of their homeland with the outline after it declared independence in 1991. Looks like it includes Crimea, for example, Adam, doesn't it? So the Winter Games chiefs have dubbed it political.
Yeah, it's very interesting. This is the International Paralympic Committee, who are also allowing people from Russia and Belarus to compete. And I'm not sure they were in the Olympic, Winter Olympic Games. I don't think those countries were allowed to compete. So they've clearly made a pro-Russian decision on competing and an anti-Ukraine decision on what they wear. Of course, there was the Ukrainian athlete who withdrew from the Winter Olympics because he wasn't allowed to wear a helmet depicting the Ukrainian athletes who had been killed in the war.
Absolutely, yes. And they were trying to find a workaround. Yeah. They didn't wear it just for the race and so on. But yes, I mean, you can sort of see why that is a political statement, can't you? But, you know, they're fighting for their homeland and their territory at the moment. Yeah. Let us go to a story about chimps. This comes after what was quite an interesting story the other week, you'll remember it, where chimps actually take in a lot of alcohol with
Yes, I did remember that story, funnily enough.
I know you read it.
I was wondering where you were going with that.
Well, it's rotten fruit and it contains a lot of alcohol. Anyway, it now turns out...
Apparently the equivalent of 2 beers some of them were found to have in their bloodstream. I remember that story.
So chimps' love for crystals could help explain our ancestors' fascination with the shiny stones and why we like them now, it says here.
See, I feel this story is possibly slightly less profound because basically it amounts to chimps like shiny things. And so do we. We like jewelry. But apparently they love crystals and it could help explain why we as human beings love jewelry. Do we need to explain it? Jewelry's just pretty, isn't it? And so are crystals.
Yeah, barracudas like shiny things too, because they look like little fish. Tear-free onions, a bite for sore eyes. A terrific story is what I was told him.
Oh,
Adam?
Gosh, that's
this is in Japan, where in Hokkaido they've developed an onion that doesn't make you cry when it's cut up. It's called the smile ball. And... And there are even hopes that it might replace apples. As a,
I'm not sure.
Raw snack.
Onion breath. But can I say how they...
4 seconds.
They did it by blasting onions with heavy irons to remove the enzyme that creates sulfuric acid that makes you in your eye that makes you cry, which I didn't know before reading this story.
Yeah, very good. Goodness me.
I just wanted to show
Adam,
off.
Thank you very much indeed. We have the sport next. The bottom place side in the Premier League, Wolves, stunned the champions Liverpool. Back in a moment.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power.
No freedom!
Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? the full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Liberation Day. By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK?
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shot's running out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what's left of it.
As a woman of colour, how did the Harris campaign speak to you?
People risk their lives to speak to us for this report.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live.
They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News, is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is, why it hasn't been stopped.
Well, let's catch up on the very latest sport now. Here is David.
Good afternoon. I'm sure all the Arsenal fans would want to know how much ammunition are you going to give Arsene Wenger to fire?
It'll be enough. Arsene wanted certain players to come in, and meanwhile he wasn't really the manager yet.
I went a few times to watch Can play, and I asked after the game, who is this guy?
Patrick was top of his list.
He was telling me that he was on his way to Arsenal, and I said, listen, you're going anywhere, I'll follow you.
He was going to join Ajax, and in fact I think Bayern Munich were also in for him at the time.
I spent 3 days in Amsterdam.
So we had hijack it.
His agents called me, tell him to take the plane to fly to London.
We were breaking the mould. We had to rely on Arsene's judgment.
Adding a continental touch to Arsenal's never-say-die style is what Wenger is promising.
Quand je suis venu, je veux dire, il y a tout ce qu'il faut pour être un grand club. Je veux dire, ils ont un public qui est fabuleux.
I believe he has a great future. At the time, English players were dominant. It was a risk, yes, when we bought foreign players.
He knew what I was missing to go to the top.
We weren't used to this at Arsenal. We were very British. It was like, who are all these French guys?
Steve Bold turned around with his tray full of beers. I just remember Patrick Fiscal square.
He was special. How they see Milan got rid of him.
Quite literally unbeatable.
Captain of the Invincibles.
You don't get a better legacy than that.
It was one of the greatest bargains in the history of Premier League transfers. Patrick Vieira, £3.5 million.
He should have a statue, in my opinion.
Everybody realised that guy could change the destiny of Arsenal Football Club.
The rest is history.
Cannes at the time had one of the best academies in the country. I mean, Zidane is obviously the other outstanding one to come out of there. And for him to start at 17, for a team like Cannes, who at that time was playing top 7, top 8 in France, and yet he was the best player on that team, pretty much. For us, in France, he was very, very highly rated.
I was coaching Monaco, and it was an end-of-season game. We played a kind of League Cup at the end of the season. He played with Cannes, and I asked after the game, who is this guy? He won the challenges, he dominated the midfield. After the game, I said to my assistant, I've seen a great player today.
He was tall, he was strong, he was so determined, he He was hard on people, but he could move the ball so well. He had everything. There was no doubt he was destined for great things.
I went a few times to watch Khan play. He had that presence, that he was quite complete player defensively and offensively. It was always difficult to buy the players from Khan to Monaco, and I thought I would try to get him.
David, thank you. Let's take a look at the weather now.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News weather.
Well, the south and east look mostly fine into next week, while northern and western parts will see rain at times. Ireland, Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland and northwest England will see a little rain at first tomorrow, but other northern parts look dry and frosty. Elsewhere, it will be largely dry too, with some low cloud and fog around. That cloud and fog will be slow to lift through the morning, but much of England and Wales should turn out sunny by lunchtime. The East Midlands, the Welsh Marches, the Welsh Marches and southwest England will remain grey the longest. Elsewhere, staying rather cloudy, patchy rain becoming confined to Northern Ireland and western Scotland.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News weather.
Well, that was the wrap. Thank you so much for watching. We have all the top stories coming up right here on Sky News in the Midnight News, including what Donald Trump had to say about Keir Starmer and the Type 45 frigate, which is now being sent by the UK to Cyprus. Back in a moment.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
We've done the work and the reading, so you don't have to.
Being a Sky News presenter.
Hello and welcome. Westminster, the heart of British politics.
I'm so sorry about what happened to you.
So what on earth is going on?
It's not true.
Can I tell you what I think? It's really unusual. Mornings with Rich and Frost.
Let's crack on. Let's get started.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
They call him the king of the jungle.
Being a Sky News journalist.
Yusra Al-Baghir has this report.
And this is what